The day the HOA rolled up in a flatbed truck and seized my rain barrels was the day I stopped playing nice. I was in my garage, wrench in hand, working on my motorcycle when I heard the clanking of metal and the hiss of plastic scraping concrete. I stepped outside to see 3 of my rain barrels I'd installed legally, mind you being loaded onto a truck. Leading the charge was none other than Wanda Ashford, president of the Elm Ridge HOA and self-declared queen of the cul-de-sac. "Ronan Keller," she called out, standing there with her arms crossed, and that ever-so-patronizing tone she reserved just for me. "These unsightly barrels violate community aesthetics and have not been approved by the board. You can't just take them," I said, walking toward her. "They're on my property behind a privacy fence. You don't get to decide what's unsightly when you've got a plastic flamingo in your yard." She ignored that. "We sent you a warning last month. You failed to submit the proper aesthetic compliance request form." "You mean the form that doesn't exist?" "That's not my concern," Wanda sniffed. "They'll be held at the community center until further notice." I looked at her, really looked at her. Perfectly ironed blouse, clipboard clutched to her chest like a holy relic, and that smug little twist of her mouth like she just won something. But she didn't. Not yet. See, I'm not just some guy with a grudge and a ripped flannel. I'm a civil engineer. Stormwater management, specifically. I designed systems to prevent the exact thing I was about to cause. And if Wanda wanted a war over water, she picked the wrong guy. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at my desk with blueprints of the neighborhood drainage system publicly available through the county website. I traced the stormwater line from my backyard to the HOA's precious community center. Built it right on the lowest point of the neighborhood, a half-inch of redirected runoff, and that building would be a swimming pool, so I got to work. First, I rerouted my downspouts underground with a few lengths of PVC pipe I had in the shed. Then I dug a shallow trench, masked it with mulch, and connected everything to a runoff channel that fed straight toward the community center's back lot. I even added a flow diverter to keep things dry most days, just in case someone came snooping. But then came the rain, and I mean a proper downpour, thunder shaking the windows, gutters overflowing, the works. I stood on my back porch, coffee in hand, and watched as my backyard stayed bone dry. All that water. It had somewhere else to go now. By morning, the HOA's inbox was flooded with complaints. So was their community center. By the time I pulled into the Elm Ridge Community Center parking lot, the place looked like a scene from a disaster relief commercial. Muddy water lapped at the sidewalk. Lawn chairs floated in lazy circles where the box court used to be. A couple of HOA volunteers stood ankle-deep in water, poking at the clogged storm drains with borrowed broom handles, their expressions somewhere between disbelief and panic. I parked my truck a little uphill and walked down with my hands in my jacket pockets. Wanda stood at the edge of the sidewalk, barking orders at a landscaping crew that clearly wanted nothing to do with her. Her shoes were soaked, and her blouse, normally crisp and ironed, clung to her arms like wet newspaper. "You look like you've had a productive morning," I said, stopping beside her. She didn't turn. "This is temporary. A drainage malfunction. We're handling it. You might want to recheck those blueprints. That whole lot's graded wrong." Wanda finally faced me. Her jaw was tight, eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep or rage, probably both. "You had something to do with this. I installed a legal stormwater diversion system on private property. You'll find I'm fully within my rights under the county code. You rerouted water into public land." I pulled out a folded document from my jacket and held it out. "Actually, that parcel's registered to the HOA as part of the community amenities, which means it's private land, yours, not the county's, and there's no easement in place protecting it from runoff. You removed my equipment, so I had to accommodate the flow elsewhere." She didn't take the paper, just stared at it like it had personally insulted her. "I'll take this to the board," she said quietly. "You mean the same board that voted last month to deny my appeals behind closed doors without a hearing?" Don't waste your time. Her mouth opened, but then someone called her name. A younger guy in a soaked hoodie jogged up holding a tablet, water dripping off the corners. "You need to see this," he said, handing her the device. She scanned whatever was on the screen, her face slowly draining of color. I leaned in, pretending not to read, but I could see enough. A plumbing inspection report. Apparently, the community center's sump pump had overloaded and shorted out, sending backed-up water through the HVAC intake. Mold remediation costs were estimated in the 5 figures. Wanda's hands trembled slightly as she handed the tablet back. "You should think twice before accusing residents of causing structural damage," I said. "Especially when you've got no legal standing on how runoff is handled once it leaves their property." She didn't respond, just turned and walked toward the building, shoes squelching with every step. That should have been the end of it. But Wanda didn't quit when she was losing. She doubled down. 3 days later, I got a letter taped to my front door, not from the HOA this time, from the city permitting office. A formal citation for unauthorized alterations to stormwater flow. It had Wanda's fingerprints all over it, but it was signed by a real inspector. I scheduled a meeting at City Hall that afternoon. When I arrived, I brought everything. Design plans, county codebooks, photos of the original rain barrels, the HOA's own bylaws. I even printed out the legal precedent from a case 2 counties over where a homeowner won damages after an HOA tampered with private rainwater systems. The inspector assigned to my case was a guy named Miguel Torres. He had the look of someone who'd been dealing with bureaucratic nonsense for too long to care about anyone's drama. But when I laid out my documentation and explained what the HOA had done, seizing property without due process, rerouting drainage infrastructure without a permit, and attempting to weaponize city enforcement, he actually sat up straighter. "You're telling me they physically removed your equipment?" he asked. "Took it off my property, no notice, no legal claim, just gone. And you have pictures, timestamps, and footage from my backyard security camera, including audio." I slid over a flash drive. He plugged it into his laptop, watched for a few minutes, and let out a quiet whistle. "This isn't just a code issue. This looks like unlawful seizure of private property." "That's what I said." He leaned back in his chair. "Give me a day. I'll talk to legal." Turns out, Miguel did more than that. By the end of the week, the city issued a stop work order on all HOA maintenance projects pending investigation. They also opened a formal inquiry into the HOA's decision-making practices. Since Wanda had filed complaints with the city under her personal name while acting as a representative of the board, without official minutes or votes to back her actions. It didn't stop there. One of the residents, an older woman named Janine, who'd lived in Elm Ridge since the development opened, dropped off a binder at my doorstep. Said she'd grown tired of Wanda's regime, as she called it. Inside were years of records, suspicious budget line items, denied maintenance requests, and closed-door meetings that violated sunshine laws. I brought it to the city attorney's office, and that's when everything started unraveling. Turns out, Wanda had been funneling HOA funds into a beautification initiative that involved hiring her nephew's landscaping firm at triple the going rate. The board had rubber-stamped it, thinking no one would look too closely. But with the flood damage, inspection reports, and now financial discrepancies coming to light, the city referred the matter to the county prosecutor. Within 2 weeks, subpoenas went out. Wanda was removed as president pending investigation. The board dissolved temporarily under emergency administrative management. And the best part? The rain barrels were returned, along with a signed apology from the interim chair. I reinstalled them the next morning. As I was tightening the last connection, Janine walked up the driveway with 2 coffees. "You really stirred the hornet's nest," she said, handing me one. "I didn't stir anything. I just stopped letting them sting everyone." She laughed, real and loud. "You know, there's a recall petition going around." People want you to run for the new board. I build drainage systems, not empires. Still, she said, people remember who bailed them out when the water rose. I looked across the street, where a crew was still pumping out the community center's crawlspace. Wanda's car was gone. Her house was up for sale within the month. Elm Ridge looked different now. Not just drier, calmer, less suspicious glances, more porch conversations. People started talking like neighbors again, and me, I kept the rain barrels. But I did add one new feature, a discreet little overflow valve. Just in case someone forgot what happens when you try to steal what doesn't belong to you. The trouble with power is that people rarely give it up willingly. Even after losing her position and watching her grip on the neighborhood dissolve, Wanda wasn't finished. It started with a letter handwritten, no return address, slid under my garage door. The paper smelled faintly of expensive perfume and desperation. You've made a mess of a well-ordered system. You'll regret it. I didn't need handwriting analysis to know who wrote it, but I wasn't rattled. If anything, I was curious. Wanda had always relied on official channels, rules bent just enough to seem legitimate. But this was personal. I contacted the city attorney's office and passed the note along just in case. They logged it, but without a direct threat or signature, there wasn't much to act on. Still, it was enough for them to keep tabs on her movements for a few weeks. Things were quiet. I went about my usual schedule, consulting on a new stormwater filtration project for the city park district. The HOA, now under interim leadership, held open meetings at the library where residents actually got to speak without being cut off mid-sentence. The vibe had shifted. People weren't afraid to ask questions anymore. Then, just as the neighborhood was settling into its new rhythm, a city truck pulled up in front of my house. A uniformed inspector stepped out, clipboard in hand, his boots still muddy from a previous stop. "Mr. Keller," he said, "I'm here about a complaint regarding illegal soil displacement and unauthorized excavation on your property." I stared at him. "You're kidding." He wasn't. Apparently, someone had filed an anonymous tip alleging I'd been digging without permits, disrupting underground utilities, and diverting stormwater onto neighboring lots. The complaint included photos, grainy, low-resolution shots of my backyard trenchwork, taken from what looked like a second-story window across the street. "I've already had a city inspection," I said. "Everything was signed off. I followed code to the letter," he nodded. "I believe you. But when we get complaints, we're obligated to follow up." I walked him through everything, showed him the stamped permits, the flow control mechanism, even the runoff test results from the last storm. He checked each detail, nodded again, and finally said, "Looks like someone's trying to bury you in red tape. They're going to need a bigger shovel." He laughed, but the tension lingered. After he left, I scanned the neighborhood from my porch. Second-story window, angled view, direct line to my backyard. It had to be the Falbrooks. Wanda's old allies. The couple who used to host HOA wine nights and whispered about undesirable landscaping whenever someone planted vegetables in their front yard. I didn't confront them. I had something better. I installed a set of trail cameras, low profile, motion activated, high resolution. I angled them to cover the fence line, the back alley, and the side yard where the mystery photographer must have stood. Then I waited. 2 nights later, at around 2 in the morning, the cameras caught movement. A figure crept along the alley, ducked behind my compost bin, and aimed a phone over my fence. A few clicks, then they vanished into the dark. I pulled the footage and enhanced the stills. The hoodie wasn't familiar, but the sneakers were white with a red stripe on the heel. I'd seen them on Leo Falbrook during a recent board meeting, tapping impatiently as the treasurer announced a forensic audit of the previous administration's finances. I submitted the footage to the city attorney. This time, they took it seriously. It turned out Leo had been part of Wanda's private maintenance initiative, the one funneling HOA funds to her nephew's landscaping company. He'd signed off on at least 2 inflated invoices. What's worse, He'd used his wife's notary stamp to backdate approvals for work that never occurred. That crossed into criminal territory. The city referred the case to the district attorney's office. I was called in to provide testimony, not just about the photos and the forged documents, but about the harassment campaign that had followed the flooding of the community center. The case snowballed. Once the DA's office dug in, they uncovered emails, dozens of them, between Wanda, Leo, and 3 other former board members. The messages discussed manipulating meeting minutes, suppressing residents' complaints, and fabricating violations to pressure problem households into compliance. My rain barrels were mentioned directly, framed as a test case for asserting control over non-conforming properties. The charges came faster than I expected. Fraud, conspiracy, misuse of funds, unauthorized surveillance. Wanda's carefully constructed empire collapsed overnight. She was arrested at a golf fundraiser in the next county over. The papers had a field day with the story. HOA queenpin dethroned in stormwater scheme. I still have the clipping. Back in Elm Ridge, the interim board called a special election. I declined their nomination, but I did agree to serve on the Finance Review Committee. I figured someone had to make sure the book stayed honest. Janine took the board seat instead. She ran unopposed and won by a landslide. First order of business: rewriting the bylaws to include mandatory transparency measures, open meeting minutes, resident voting on non-essential expenditures, and a ban on closed session decisions unrelated to legal matters. The neighborhood actually felt free. People planted what they wanted. Kids rode bikes without being chased down for helmet infractions. The guy on Maple Lane even built a chicken coop behind his garage. I kept a low profile after that. My rain barrels remained untouched. The runoff system worked exactly as designed, and the community center was eventually retrofitted with a proper drainage basin funded by a grant I helped the new board apply for. One evening, as I was cleaning out the gutters, Janine stopped by again. "They're auctioning off Wanda's house next month," she said, handing me a flyer. "The bank foreclosed after her legal bills piled up. Can't say I'm surprised." She tried to claim it as a homestead exemption, but the DA proved she'd been living with her sister for 6 months. Said she couldn't stand the smell of mold. I chuckled. "Poetic." Janine tilted her head. "You know, you could buy it. I've got enough on my plate." "Still," she said, "you turned a weapon into a wake-up call. People talk about it like you saved the block." "I didn't save anything. I just reminded them who the water really belongs to." She nodded and left me to my gutters. Later that night, I walked into the backyard. The moonlight reflected off the barrels, their surfaces smooth and quiet. It hadn't rained in days, but I could still hear the faint trickle inside, steady, measured, patient, like justice. The auction drew a larger crowd than anyone expected. By the time I arrived, mostly out of curiosity, the front lawn of Wanda's former house was dotted with folding chairs, lawn signs, and a few opportunistic food trucks parked just beyond the curb. A city-appointed auctioneer stood under a pop-up tent, his tie flapping in the breeze as he read off legal descriptions and parcel ID numbers. The atmosphere was less somber than it was festive, like a neighborhood block party with a side of righteous closure. I kept to the back, arms crossed, watching as the bids came in. A couple from out of town finally won the property. Their real estate agent whispered something about avoiding HOAs moving forward. A nearby group of residents clapped, not so much for the purchase, but for what it symbolized. The last remnant of Wanda's control was finally gone. A familiar face approached from the edge of the crowd. Officer DeWitt, the community liaison officer who'd quietly coordinated with the city attorney during the investigation, nodded toward the street. "Got a second?" I followed him toward his cruiser parked a few houses down. Once we were out of earshot, he leaned against the door and crossed his arms. "We got confirmation this morning. There's going to be a federal angle now." I lifted my eyebrows. "Federal? Over HOA funds?" Turns out Wanda wasn't just overpaying her nephew for landscaping. She was moving those payments through a shell company registered out of state. The money was being funneled into a private account tied to a PAC. My stomach turned. A political action committee? Yup. And not a small one. She'd been routing HOA dues into campaign contributions. It's wire fraud, money laundering, and campaign finance violations. Federal agents showed up at her sister's place this morning with a warrant. I let out a slow breath. And the board didn't know? Hard to say. Leo's lawyers already flipped. He's offering testimony in exchange for immunity. But from what we've seen, it looks like Wanda kept the real scheme tight. The others were complicit in the cover-ups, but the financial trail. That starts and ends with her. The implications hit me harder than I expected. This hadn't just been about rain barrels or power trips. She'd used our neighborhood, our trust, as a personal slush fund to buy influence miles beyond our zip code, DeWitt continued. There's a federal grand jury being assembled. If it goes to trial, you'll probably be subpoenaed. Your documentation helped kick this off. I nodded slowly. I'll testify. He gave a short nod, then added, there's something else. During the search, they found burner phones. One of them had photos of your backyard, recent ones, and some very specific notes. I didn't have to ask what kind of notes. They think she was planning a nuisance lawsuit. Claim damages, accuse you of sabotage, maybe even try to frame you for the community center flooding. But between the time-stamped footage and the inspections, it wouldn't have gone anywhere. She was still trying to get even. She never stopped. As he drove off, I stood there for a long moment, watching the last of the auction attendees disperse. A light wind rustled the leaves. Everything felt quieter now, not out of tension, but relief. That weekend, the new board held a town hall, this time in the local high school auditorium, not the community center. The building was still undergoing repairs, though now funded by a grant from the county's public infrastructure program, a grant Janine had helped secure with the help of the finance committee. The turnout filled every seat. There was no podium, no closed doors, just a semicircle of folding tables and microphones. Residents were invited to speak, ask questions, suggest reforms. They brought notes, not complaints. Ideas, not accusations. When Janine called my name toward the end of the meeting, I hesitated. I hadn't planned on speaking. But as I stepped up to the mic, I saw the faces of people who had once kept their heads down, now upright, alert, determined. They weren't afraid anymore. I never wanted a fight, I said. I wanted water barrels. I wanted to do the right thing, legally, responsibly. But Wanda took something small and turned it into a power game. And when she lost that game, she tried to burn everything down with her. A few people nodded. One of the older residents, Mr. Holtz, who'd once been fined for repainting his shutters without approval, crossed his arms and leaned back, visibly satisfied. But this neighborhood, it didn't fall apart. It pulled together. You all pushed back, you showed up, and that's the difference. HOA doesn't mean throne, it means responsibility. There was a pause, then scattered applause that quickly grew. Janine gave me a quiet nod as I stepped down. After the meeting, a few residents came up with questions about zoning, drainage, and how to install rainwater collection systems of their own. I offered to help draft templates for permit requests and diagrams that complied with city code. Before I left, the treasurer handed me a printed draft of the new bylaws, 10 pages shorter but infinitely more clear. The following month, the community center reopened. The old bulletin board, once plastered with passive-aggressive notices, was replaced by a digital screen with rotating updates, volunteer sign-ups, and birthday announcements. A mural was painted on the side wall by the local high school art class, depicting the neighborhood with exaggerated, cheerful colors, and a rain barrel tucked against every home. One morning, I noticed a utility crew working near the south entrance. I asked one of the workers what they were doing. He pointed to a new stormwater filtration vault being installed, funded by a state resilience grant. The HOA had applied for it on my recommendation. The new system would reduce runoff by 70%. As they dug, they uncovered something unexpected, an old, rusted pipe that didn't appear on any of the original neighborhood blueprints. It led toward the far side of the green belt, where the land dipped just enough to suggest it had once been a natural drainage channel before development covered it up. The discovery prompted a reevaluation of the entire neighborhood's runoff plan. I was pulled in as a consultant, and over the next few weeks, we worked with the city to redesign the system to better handle future storms. More rain barrels went up. Grass swales replaced concrete trenches. Children started helping their parents paint their barrels in bright colors, some even added flowers. It wasn't just about water anymore. It was about ownership of homes, of community, of trust. Months passed. Wanda's trial made the local news, then the regional. She was convicted on multiple counts of fraud and sentenced to 7 years in federal prison. Her name was scrubbed from all HOA documents, and her actions were used as a cautionary tale during board member training across the county. Leo took a plea deal and moved out quietly. The Falbrooks left the neighborhood shortly after. Spring brought the kind of rains that once would have caused tension. Instead, people watched the water flow through the new system calmly and efficiently. The community center stayed dry. The runoff moved exactly as it should. I checked the barrels every few days, not out of worry but habit. One afternoon, while replacing a filter, a boy from down the block rode up on his bike and asked what the barrels were for. I explained the system, how it worked, why it mattered. He nodded, then asked if he could help clean the gutters. I handed him the garden gloves. That evening, I sat on the porch with a cold drink and watched the sun set behind the row of rooftops. Porch lights flicked on one by one. In the distance, someone strummed a guitar. Laughter carried down the block. The fight was over, but the roots of what we'd built ran deeper now, stronger than fear, louder than any clipboard or fine. No one would be seizing rain barrels again. Not here. Not ever.